Lisa Freehill. I am at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and I'm the only statistician over there. So I welcome these opportunities to see other government statisticians. We've got 5 talks, at least I think we have 5 talks, and I'm going to ask each of the speakers to please make sure you speak clearly into the telephone as well, and then if there's questions from the audience, please go ahead and repeat the question so that the folks who are on the telephone can hear it, okay? So the first speaker is Mitchell Shoei.
Hey everybody, we're coming around to the very last section of presentations today, so I want to thank Mike for helping organize everything. All right, let's get rolling. So how many of us in our jobs, in our fields, have to check the news on a regular basis for their job requirements or what they need to do? Okay, a couple people. And how many of us are just constantly checking the news anyway because that's our nature? Yeah, that's definitely how I feel. There's a lot of data right there. The way I originally started working in DC was I was doing an unpaid internship, classic, for some lobbyists who needed constant media information. So it was somebody's job every morning to look at headlines containing specific keywords from the day before. We had to compile all that data. We had to use a specific methodology to manually say whether it was positive, negative, or neutral regarding that certain topic, and then we did the analysis itself in Excel, made some bar charts, etc. for that. And I really liked that project, and I was excited to see what kind of media analysis would be possible in the future as my data analysis skills were ramping up. So if I wanted to make a project like this my own, how was I going to do that? I considered, instead of manually collecting that information daily, having an API to automatically collect that. What is an API? It is a system where a server, whenever you give it a set of instructions, will return a specific set of data. You can create data, delete it, or read it that way. This was specifically meant to read that data from a couple different sources, say Washington Post, New York Times, but let's say I wanted to get as many sources as possible from those different, anywhere, any kind of news sources. A new blog pops up. I want that article, for example. Instead of classifying it by ourselves as this is relevant to the Federal Register, this is relevant to government needs. What if I want the machine learning process to automatically categorize that for us, save some time? For positive, negative, neutral, what if I wanted a sentiment analysis to look over all the words, score them whether they are more positive or negative in tone, to see whether it has more of an effect on the reader, whether it's a positive or a negative headline regarding a specific topic? You keep seeing things like that over time, it can definitely have an impact on how you perceive the topic to come up later. So that first section, the API collection, thankfully there's a lot of great resources already existing for that. News API, newsapi.org. It's really easy to use. You input an HTML address with all of the parameters that you want, say the date of the content, the language of the content, and it returns it in a JSON data file that you can then use to parse and look at yourself. What does that look like whenever you ask the API what you want? Let's take a look at the second PowerPoint I have right here. So this is whenever I call for all of the sources possible. This is just a little screenshot from my R code. And it returns a couple different languages here from a lot of different countries, and it already has a category assigned to what kind of news source that is. You can see you've got your more tried and true journalistic outposts like USA Today here. Wired is a magazine that's been around for a while. Then you see some lesser, more creative content like Sport Bible, Lad Bible, things like that, Vice News, places where it's not necessarily considered a newspaper, but it's still making content that people are seeing all the time. And what I was able to do is use News API, but instead of having to use HTML to set the parameters for all of the things that I wanted to receive from it, I wanted an easier way to do that. R is my language of choice. So I looked online, and there was a wrapper using R for me to access this API. Someone named M. Kearney on GitHub created the 1.0 version, but by the time I had gotten around to it, News API had come out with 2.0. So you had some new parameters you could choose. You had slight little changes that if I tried to make the same request using the 1.0 version, you were lost. So I had to look into the wrapper myself to see where I needed to change the code and make the R output, so you could just input the parameters as you would with an R function, and then it would create the HTML link that it would then ask the server for the data using the parameters given. And then once I had that, once I had tweaked it enough to make 2.0 work and the new parameters to work, I asked, okay, how can I call the API as many times as I need to receive as much information from as far back as I can go? There is a free version and an enterprise version. So the free version lets you go from the last 30, 31 days. So I was able to write a loop function that let me pull from every single day as far back as it could go up until the current time, and then shove it all together into a nice big data frame. And the different variables that it's able to give you are the source, the author specifically, the first couple sentences of the articles themselves, the time published, and even an image that's included with the publish article if that's of interest. We'll go over to my second PowerPoint here again. And right here, we're seeing a matrix compiled of some, after I apply text mining to the big data frame that I've created, I can see a matrix that basically gives a 1 in the matrix for every single time this word appears in the list. I'll come back to that in just a second. So this has a couple of different interesting use cases for it. You could create your own customized news alerts if you wanted to put the API calls into a server, an RStudio server, for example. You could ask it every day to pull all of the news headlines with a specific keyword from the day before. That way, if you reach a specific point, like X number of articles containing keyword of interest, it'll tell you, and it'll show you all of the articles that might fit that description. If you wanted to see when a news cycle was starting, cresting, and then sort of stopping, you could take a look at a histogram once you've binned, selected specific chopped up pieces of an amount of time, where you could look at where, okay, my variable is started out with 3 articles this week, 12 articles the next week, and back to 3 articles the week after that. You could see where it's risen and fallen. If you work in media, this is a good chance to consider when is the right time to release an article. If it looks like the crest has already fallen on that, you might not get as much user interest. Going back to the sentiment analysis, you can take a look at what sources are covering specific topics more positively or negatively. Using a sentiment dictionary, that way specific phrases that have specific weights on people have a numeric register and a category. For example, the picture we're looking at right here has a couple of different keywords that relate to specific emotions. So we can take a look at what emotions people might be elicited from seeing a specific headline in a specific way. I think I have a little bit more time, so
Yeah.
Oh, sure thing, sure thing. Right. I know that the next person that's going on, Kelsey Gray, she's going to be talking a lot about linguistic, semantic parsing, things like that. So stay tuned for that. I think we'll wrap it up right there, but thank you very much for your time. My contact information is right here. My email is mitchellshoei@live.com, and I'm looking for career opportunities right now. So thank you very much.